All right, we're rolling. Hello everybody and welcome back to the studio space. So glad to have you. Today we're gonna go ahead and sum up the month of July and maybe take a closer look at some of the projects that I've been able to chip away at. So first being Black Sheep, which obviously has been my main priority over the last month. I'm gonna go ahead and take you through some of the sections and maybe spotlight some of the little elements that may have gotten lost in the mix and just give you some insights into that whole piece entirely and just where it came from and where it's going. Second, I'm still trying to sculpt my first frame, yeah, that one right there, and it's quite the journey to say the least. Third, I have a piece called Tentatively, just being okay with it, and it has a frame that turned out to be very structurally unsound, let's call it that. So I'm going to show you a way that I had to creatively work around this frame to make it usable in a permanent way. But hey, I'm getting ahead of myself now. Let's just go ahead and take a look at Black Sheep. Okay, so here we are with Black Sheep. You may notice right off the bat that each section has been designated a color. And the idea for this whole piece in general came out of a flash or a vision while I was doing some kind of normal, everyday, just totally mundane task. I didn't expect it to be quite so colorful, but somewhere along the way I decided, hey, why not throw in some splashes of color, right? I may have gotten a little bit carried away, but I think that that's more experimental for what I was trying to do. Therefore, I think that I yielded more experience by deciding to add these splashes of color, considering that I've been doing pretty much exclusively black and white work for the better part of a decade. So I think that it was a pretty good idea to just go nuts with the color. And the thought process on the color in this piece is to sort of group complements. So as you can see, we have a purple paired with a yellow, we have a green paired with a red, and we will have a blue lake with a whole bunch of craziness going on in there. With an orange sunset as well. And obviously there are pockets of different colors elsewhere, like we have the blue and yellow eye, but in general, trying to keep some kind of theme in here, I thought that maybe pairing those complements might be a good idea. So I started this whole piece with the idea of just ripping a large sheet of watercolor into the shape of a character or some sort of creature and having the eye be the most prominent feature on its head, leaving the nose and the mouth to be discovered by the audience as the audience's eye wanders throughout the piece. I actually sketched the concept in this little pocket-sized sketchbook just to kind of get the idea down a little bit. And I also knew that I wanted to add some sort of academic portrait into this piece, so that's where this purple section came from. But I wanted to also add a lot of elements of surrealism to try to blend in that academic section with all of the rest of the craziness that's going on here. So we have a pipe with a skull, and out of the pipe is some smoke trailing into the eye itself. We've got some portraits in there and everything, little hidden gems. And then there's this little devil guy that seems to be humming a tune or something into this guy's ear, so maybe that's why he looks so sad. I also keep a list of repeating series that I like to include in my larger work. Like this is a duality, which is essentially just two surreal portraits that split down the middle and are conjoined in this conflicting sort of emotion or purpose, whatever. These ones turn out to be very, very different, but you know, that's just kind of how it happened. I just kind of let the process take over on this one, and then that's how that was born. I also keep a list of general iconography that I like to recur in all of my pieces in general, so that's where the idea for this keyhole came from, to which there will be a key in this lake, and there's other things like this porcelain teapot that's also turned out to be some sort of ghost or entity or whatever. And then you know, I like to draw birds, I like to draw eyes, so all of these things kind of make their way into my work one way or another, and I think that it's good to just include some iconography that you like to draw. And I just like to include those things because it just makes it more me. I don't know. And finally, just to kind of wrap up this whole piece and my explanation of it, the next section will be this lake, like I've said, and there will be a few different illustrative elements, like the key I already talked about, but there's going to be a fetus in there because, hey, why not, right? And then there's going to be a hand that's kind of reaching out from the seabed like a sort of zombie or something. I'm playing around with this idea of making all of these fish that are also eyes. Just a couple of little surrealistic elements. Maybe I'll throw in some coral if I'm feeling like splashing in some additional color in there and everything. But all in all, the perimeter of the piece is pretty much masked in at the very least, and I've covered all of it a couple of times. So there's a little bit of work to be done in the perimeter, but the majority needs to happen inside the center of this piece. And then I'll probably just go back into each individual section and then tighten things up, maybe add a couple of things here and there. But for the most part, we can consider this piece approaching the tail end at the very least. So really excited to have this out the door and on to my next large piece. So thanks for listening to that little spiel. Let's go over to the frame that I'm trying to sculpt. All right, here we are in the sculpture area, and this is the frame that I'm doing my best to sculpt. Maybe it's about halfway done. It's made out of monster clay, which is an oil-based, waxy feeling clay that I heat up in a crock pot whenever I work with it. The biggest challenge to overcome when making something like this was transitioning from 2D to 3D, and you might think to yourself, well, that's obvious, but it's little things like making sure that the depth of the interior section here is evenly distributed throughout. And as an example of how I failed at that distribution in the past, here's another frame that will never be molded, and it's because the depth is not uniform enough, and the attention required to salvage it would be better spent making a new one. So maybe if I level up at sculpting a few dozen times in the future, I can learn to save this guy. But it just so happens, like if you look at the depth of this area versus its opposite, this area, you can see that this section is quite thicker, and that's a problem. So we can't have this hanging on gallery walls. Plus it's a lot beefier, like it's just a lot more bulk to this one, and that would mean that it's more expensive to recreate. And ideally I'm going to be able to recreate something that's a little bit more manageable dozens of times, but again, we'll see what happens. While I do have you here, let's take a look at this piece. Like I said earlier, this piece is tentatively called Just Being Okay With It, and this one is watercolor and graphite on hot press watercolor paper, just like Black Sheep, and it's mounted to a piece of masonite panel which has been painted and gold leafed, just like Black Sheep. So this is just the general process of how I go about making my artwork, is to mount the watercolor paper to the board so that there's less room for ripping the paper, because nobody likes ripped paper unless it's done in a tasteful way, I suppose. Anyway, so this piece is pretty much finished, but the name is tentative because the frame in which it will rest for the rest of its existence is not finished. So I reserve the right to change the names of my pieces until they're ready to go to their homes or to a gallery or whatever it may be. I made this piece specifically at this dimension because I had this frame that I thrifted and I wanted to fill it. It was only when I was taking out the backing of the frame that I realized that the corners were just not very stable and they broke very, very easily. So what I ended up doing, because I couldn't glue them because there was chips in the corners and I couldn't rivet them obviously because of the structural integrity, I decided to sculpt these frame corners out of epoxy sculpt, which is now hard as a rock. I'm taking it through all the way around the frame, and then I've also reinforced the back with an epoxy sculpt as well. So this guy should stay together pretty darn well for the future. Anybody that decides to show it in their space shouldn't have a worry about the integrity of the frame. So pretty happy about that. I'm still gonna be painting these frame corners so that they kind of line up with everything, but I could even just keep them black. Who knows? Everything is up in the air, right? But anyway, so this is on the tail end of being finished, and then this will be ready to go. So really excited to get this one out the door as well so that we can move on to even more smaller projects. So back to the framing area. Okay, so that is my current space and what I'm working on right now. Thank you for joining me on this little tour. Just a heads up, I release all of these vlogs on a weekly basis to my patrons on Patreon, and made the decision recently to maybe just release one in a public way every month. So I'm thinking that the last week of the month will be the time that I release each public vlog. But if you'd like to see more of them, please feel encouraged to go over to my Patreon and subscribe for as little as $2 a month, and with that pledge you'll be able to see all of my vlogs. I'm in the process of making an intro video for this full-length video thing that I'm slowly working my way towards here, and I think it's just gonna have an idea of what to expect from my videos, about my process and the documentation of it, as well as the educational and inspiring and hopefully entertaining areas of it as well, but all of that is kind of TBD at this point. Otherwise, I'm going to be making a Patreon video that showcases my offerings and what you get as the benefit of pledging $2, $5, or $10 a month to my practice. So that's all in the works. So thank you for joining me. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. Why not? Maybe hit like a little like button, help a brother grow his channel. And for the love of God, go ahead and subscribe if you like what you saw here today. So until next time, I'll be talking to you later.